What's going on, people? This is Renegade Operative, and today we are with the Infinite Ammo Syndicate. We're here to talk about the Sega Genesis today. We're having an episodic discussion. I would like to introduce my panel. First, we have Kaneki.
Sega does when Nintendo don't.
I knew that was coming out of nowhere.
Pretty obvious, man.
Next up, we have Daybreaker.
How's it going, guys?
Jojo.
I am running on full blast processing.
Oh my god.
Yes.
And of course, you have me, your host, Renegade Operative. So shut up. So we're gonna get into this with the first question. We have 9 questions in the doc. Podcast should go really fast. So question number 1 is, what was your experience growing up with the Sega Genesis? How did you get formally introduced to the platform? Who wants to go first?
Okay, go ahead.
Sure. So for me, it wasn't. I didn't actually grow up with a Sega Genesis in my household, unfortunately. The Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo were a little bit past my time. I remember more growing up with the N64 and the Sega Saturn. But my brother, I think the first time I actually played a Genesis may have been my brother borrowed his friend's Genesis, and we played through the entirety of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie video game. And that was probably my first time playing through a Sega Genesis game. And kind of as I got older, I grew more into the idea of retro gaming, and so I started going backward. I eventually got my own Genesis, started adding to my own collection. So yeah, I've gotten to play some of the greats, like all the Sonic games and Vector Man, and there's a whole shit ton of good games on the Genesis that I missed out on. But I recently was playing the Mighty Morphin Power Ranger the movie video game, and I don't it's not as good as I remember it. It just must have been that warm fuzzy nostalgia because I played through the whole game with my older brother, and so it was like, oh, this game is great, and I got it, and I was playing it, and I was like, oh my god, this isn't as good as I thought it was.
I think the Genesis was my first console, because I just remember my brother having it, and he played Mortal Kombat 1 on there, and I was so fucking ecstatic about the gore, setting people on fire with Scorpion. It was so amazing. So we eventually got more games for that system that included Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Sonic 3. I played over my cousin's house, and I believe we also had Separation Anxiety, which was Spider-Man and Venom. I really love those games to fucking death, because they just introduced me to a whole new genre, which was video games at the time, because my aunt was so into movies, horror movies and shit. So I didn't know anything about video games until my brother and my cousins introduced me into them. I remember all those experiences with playing Street Fighter 2 and getting absolutely bodied because I had no idea what I was doing. And it just was something that grew on me as time went on and on and on. And I believe the library grew as well. The more I played more games on there, the more I got super excited. I did enjoy the NES for what it was, but I believe the Genesis really solidified me enjoying video games as a whole. So anyone else?
I guess I'll go. This is probably going to make me sound really, really old, but
we're all old here.
I first got introduced to the Genesis when I was I think 6 or 7. This was back when the Genesis, and I mean not Genesis, but the first Sonic the Hedgehog was kind of new, and my only experience with video games was the NES and the arcades, and I went into I saw pictures of them in magazines, and I saw commercials on TV about the games. And one night I was at my cousin's house. Me and my mom went to my cousin's house. I don't remember why we were there. And I went into the bedroom where my cousin Jason was, and he was playing the game. I had no idea it was there, and I was just in awe. Like I said, back then, my only exposure to video games was my Nintendo Entertainment System in the arcades, and ever since then, it's become one of my favorite systems ever. I ended up getting one from a yard sale when I was in 5th grade, back in '95, and I got Sonic Spinball, and it's been growing on me ever since. Like, got into Streets of Rage, and eventually, when I got my JRPG groove, that was when I really, really got into the Genesis, because Phantasy Star and Shining Force, in my opinion, are some of the best JRPGs I've ever played, and it's been awesome. I love it.
Kaneki, what about you?
I wanted. Okay, my first experience on the Sega Genesis was, I think, pretty much when my brother. I think similar to your story, Ren, when they introduced me to video games.
Oh yeah.
I think it was around the time when they were mostly playing the Sega Genesis, and I think when it's not the PlayStation. I know it's not a discussion about PlayStation, but I think it was around the time when PlayStation was out and stuff, and they were playing mostly those two main platforms. The first game I was introduced for the Sega Genesis was Sonic the Hedgehog 1, and I think at the time when they just released their third installment, I really did have a blast with the series before they were fucking decided to chill out for many years. And the other game I was introduced is one of my all-time favorites, if not the favorite of all time, is Streets of Rage 2, the classic. Could never stop playing that game for whatever reason. I think it was because of the gameplay that introduced me back then. I think in a way it does beat Final Fight, because I also played Final Fight when I did have the chance to get the SNES, and really flew clunky when it compares to the Streets of Rage 2. So I really have fun playing the Sega Genesis at the time.
Kaneki, can you take question number 2, please?
I got you. What did you think of the marketing battle between Sega versus Nintendo back then? This includes Sega using blast processing as a gimmick. Well, I can't say because I didn't exist when that marketing happened, but I could tell you I do like some of the game's soundtrack from the Sega Genesis.
Dude, fucking Sega tried to go at Nintendo like hard, like super hard. Like every single time it was like, oh, Sega does what Nintendo. Here's blast processing. Like people didn't even know what the hell blast processing was, and it was this entire like marketing gimmick behind it. So they really, I think they knew that the SNES was right around the corner, and graphically they could not compete because the graphics for the SNES were phenomenal. Better ports of certain arcade games, unlike Mortal Kombat 1 that had Sweat for Blood, and they had like just so much to offer in terms of that. So Sega knew that, and this is a question later, they knew that they had to do something in order to keep up with the times, and they didn't want to make a new console specifically. So they made all those fucking add-ons that made like no sense, but we're gonna talk about that later. Still, I just think that marketing is key for a lot of people, and the way they did go at Nintendo, it enticed a couple of people, a couple of mature hardcore gamers who wanted that sort of adult content like the Blood Code from Mortal Kombat, or more mature rated games like Eternal Champions for the Sega CD. So I thought in some degree it did work, but ultimately I think Nintendo releasing updated consoles, that was very beneficial for them in the long run.
And you have to remember too, marketing was so much more prominent back in that era because, the internet wasn't a big thing like it is today. Like now you can, you got a question anything, you can look it up. So you can, you can get breakdowns of specifications of like systems like the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. And, so the marketing really was integral to the Genesis being such a success as it was. And I think the big leg up that they had at the time is when the Sega Genesis was released. The Super Nintendo wasn't out yet, and the NES, of course, was 8-bit graphics as opposed to the Genesis's 16-bit, and that was what James Rolfe coins the bit wars. And speaking of, he did a really great breakdown when he did the whole Super Nintendo versus Sega Genesis videos as himself instead of the nerd character. And that was the first time that I had learned exactly what blast processing meant, meaning that the processing power of the Genesis was slightly better than that of the Super Nintendo. So that's what they used for their marketing. And yes, that was about when he breaks down all the specs, that's about the only thing that the Genesis really has over the Super Nintendo, is being able to run games faster than what the Super Nintendo could. But when it comes to graphic fidelity, video resolution and things like that, the Super Nintendo oftentimes is superior. And the music, is very debatable. Super Nintendo has, of course, great, soundtracks, but the Genesis does have its own unique tones, and we kind of talked about that prior when we were talking about collections, and I know this will come up further in the doc. Just some of these collections that come out can't really replicate that sound that the Genesis had. It's either like off, or the pitch is different, or it's something weird. A lot of those at-games consoles, for example, have a horrible time emulating Genesis sound.
Oh God, I know about that. I saw a demonstration of it. It was horrible.
Oh yeah, they're super bad. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's definitely not something that Sega could do now. Like if they were in the console market for any reason nowadays, it's not something that they could really do. The internet has really sort of taken away the need for that sort of marketing. But at the time, I mean, it worked. It worked because it was a hot button issue, or a hot button topic, if you will, that many gamers of that time were talking about.
Yeah, all you gotta do is simply just imagine, no Google, no nothing, just walk up to someone and say, hey, this has blast processing, and they're like, oh, what's that? I might get excited because I don't know what the fuck it is, but it sounds so enticing. But nowadays, you're right, anyone can just simply say, you know what, I got a gaming PC, so even if the console is a little bit more better in processor power, I can still have a gaming PC and it will destroy some of the stuff out there. So yeah, it was definitely a novelty of the time, but I really did appreciate what they tried to do, because like I said, the console having just the SNES in general, it having most of the leg up with the specs, I believe that Sega needed something in order to push that console out there even more. So I commend them for doing that, because it was a really cool thing to do. And back then, I do believe even if you had Nintendo or a Sega console, you could benefit, because there's so much to each library that there's nothing really to argue over now. Console wars now are stupid, but back then they were actually great. You could go over your friend's house or your cousin's house, play the SNES, you can go at home, play the Sega Genesis, have a good time.
I agree.
Well, since I was around when the Sega Nintendo console war, for lack of a better term, was going around, and I was one of the kids who actually, first I had a Super Nintendo, then a little bit later I actually got a Sega Genesis at a garage sale, so I was playing both systems, and this is what I noticed after looking back on it from an adult perspective. It was awesome because both companies both platforms, I should say, were constantly trying to outdo each other, and because of them trying to constantly do that, we got so many good games. Yeah, we got a ton of good shit. That's what I really loved. It's not like nowadays where, okay, the competition is clearly the main one, for example, is Nintendo, Xbox, PS4, and Xbox are just resting on their laurel. But I do believe now it's console wars are just boring now, but back then when they really put in their effort, it really meant something. Oh yeah, and it wasn't just the games that were entertaining. I don't know if you guys remember the commercials and the ads that they had on TV and in magazines where it was just fun, because those commercials were just so fun to watch back in the day. Like sometimes when I'm cleaning up around the house, I'll put on go on YouTube and look up a compilation of old Sega and Nintendo commercials from
I
back in the
remember.
day.
I remember the
Yeah.
screaming Sega guy. That
Sega.
always Sega. It's just
And then
it's
the PS1 destroyed them.
oh yeah. It's unfortunate with the Saturn.
Yep, Sega and Nintendo are competing. Sony, hold my beer.
Yeah, it did get unfortunate like later, but I think we could talk about like Nintendo for like a later discussion because they held their own in my opinion with the N64, even though it had like less power and they had cartridges and CDs were like better. They definitely held their own with the games they released.
Oh yeah.
So we're gonna get into question number 3, which is interesting. So, what is your favorite and least favorite game on the Genesis? I have to think about this one, but if I would say like favorite, it would have to be Streets of Rage 2. No contest.
Fuck you, Ren.
That game is incredible. I love that fucking game so much I can't help it.
It's my childhood.
It's really one of the best beat 'em up sequels I ever played in a long time, and I think that is definitely the definition of how a sequel should be, improving on everything. The first one is just so hard, it's really difficult to get into, but the second one feels perfected, and it's so fun with co-op.
Hey, I'll tell you this. The first 2 have better music than 3.
Yeah, 3, disappointing with the music variety there. I don't know what they were thinking. But least favorite game, this might be a controversial answer, but I would say I wasn't really a fan of Comic Zone. It was because I just didn't get how the game operated. It's like very cryptic with the things you have to do. Oh, you got to pick up a rat. What do I do with this thing? I don't know. It's like really not specific with the gameplay. I like straightforward Sega games, like you're playing Contra Hardcore and you're shooting the shit out of people. I like games like that where it's not very vague with the stuff you have to do in that game. So anyone else?
I'll go.
Okay, go ahead, Kaneki. Go ahead.
All right. First of all, fuck you, Ren, for stealing my obvious answer of my
You're welcome. You're welcome.
bastard. Yeah, pretty much the same answer, Ren. The Streets of Rage 2 was probably my favorite game of all time because it was one of the first games that I was playing when I had the Genesis. Besides Sonic the Hedgehog, I think it was the first Sonic the Hedgehog. But this game I couldn't stop playing for whatever reason. It was probably because due to the fact that the combat was absolutely great. The controls felt smooth whenever you do like a special. Like they felt like no limitation at all when you do, just combos with the characters. Something I think Final Fight should have done better in my opinion. As much as fun I had with Final Fight, I think this game did way better in terms of the music and the gameplay. The least favorite, that's a tough one. Probably I can't say Streets of Rage 3 because there is worse games. Someone can go ahead. I need to think for this one.
All right, I guess I can go. My absolute favorite Genesis game was Phantasy Star 4, mainly because I discovered this game when I got into my JRPG groove, and up until I played the Phantasy Star games in general, all the video game RPGs and some of the tabletop ones I played were set in like medieval fantasy settings, whereas excuse me, Phantasy Star games were set in sort of like a Star Wars type setting with like planets and spaceships and mythical stuff thrown in. And 4 was just so good because it actually had a more dynamic story with still frames that are kind of laid out like a comic book, which was the closest thing we can get to, I guess, cinematic cutscenes back then. And the story was just so good, and I love the characters so much. I adopted a cat in 2010 and named her Rika after one of the characters. My least favorite game, I'm probably gonna say, it was some advanced Dungeons and Dragons game that was way more complex than it needed to be because it had so many menus and stuff, and it was either that or Baby's Day Out, which was made off of a really shitty kids movie that came out in like the 90s.
Huh.
Oh my god. Okay, so just to add some context to this worst list, some of the games they have on here looks like complete garbage. Like, they have this game called Rise of the Robots. And
oh god, I know that game.
I'm just going to post an image here. Like, what is this?
A really, really bad fighting game, because that was also on Super Nintendo.
Oh, it was? Oh.
You want to know how to beat your enemies? Low kicks.
Really? You just have to spam low kick and you win? Oh my god.
That and Player One. See that blue guy on there? That's Player One, no matter what.
Oh, so it doesn't...
Player One's always that blue robot, and it's either AIs or the second player that have a different character.
Bruh, I didn't even know, like, Shaq Fu was on the Genesis. I didn't even know this. That's
Ironically, Shaq Fu on the Genesis was a little bit better than the Super Nintendo because I think it had an additional character.
It seems like it's not saying
more characters.
It seems like it's not saying much though. It's still Shaq Fu.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I just found what I could say is my least favorite game on the Genesis. WWF Royal Rumble. Because you really had button mash if you want to defeat your opponent. And for a fact that it's really hard to pull off moves in that game.
Oh. If I had another worse one, it would be Sonic 3D Blast for Genesis. I didn't like that game. It was top-down Sonic 3D Blast.
Wasn't there a CD version? I heard that was better.
I think so.
There was a Saturn version. Actually, there was a Saturn version, and it wasn't really much better. It had like maybe better sound, and the CG FMV sequences played a little cleaner. Like they actually tried putting a couple FMV cutscenes on the Genesis version, and they tried. I'll say that much.
Yeah, that game's a little bit of a guilty pleasure for me. I know it's not great, but I don't think it's horrible. You know, so it's that guilty pleasure status for me for Sonic 3D Blast.
Yeah, I would say that and maybe Shaq Fu. It's one of those games to play when you're like smashed. Completely fucking smashed.
Oh yeah, just get really smashed and just bash buttons.
Actually, I have another favorite to add. One of my also favorites was Sonic Spinball, for whatever reason.
That one was fun. I love that.
It's like Sonic, but pinball, but with Sonic. It was great.
Right. That game actually got me into pinball. Like after I played that on my Genesis, I started going to arcades. Yeah, remember those arcades? And I got to play pinball, and I played a bunch of pinball, and I loved it.
Actually, I have another favorite. I really friggin' love Jurassic Park. I thought it was good. I only played it like one time, but just the way the mechanics worked, the way the dinosaurs looked, it really sucked.
Platformer, right?
Yeah, it's the platformer. It really sucked me into the experience.
Yeah, that one was really cool because all the levels were non-linear, and when you played as the guy, I think it was Grant, you had so many different kinds of weapons, whereas you could play as the Velociraptor, and you're like just booking and jumping all around the place. It was fun.
Oh yes.
So for me, for my favorite game, it's kind of a top stuff that's split between Castlevania Bloodlines and Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja Master for me for favorites. Shinobi 3 is just a hands down really, really stellar game. Amazing pixel art for its time, has a really good soundtrack that fits the game's aesthetic. It can be a little cryptic at times. I think like the second or third level, it gets kind of a little weird where you have to like jump up on like these platforms and things like that. But other than that, I mean, it has some really just fun, stellar gameplay. Castlevania Bloodlines, being the only Castlevania title on a Sega platform, it's just another, again, really stellar game. I mean, I know a lot of people don't really hold it to like Super Castlevania 4 standards, because Castlevania 4, of course, has a lot of mechanics that were not present in Bloodlines, but I do think Bloodlines stands out in its own right. And again, very stellar soundtrack. The second stage, Sinking Old Sanctuary is the name of the track, and it's gotten a couple of remakes and in later games, and that's just always been one of my all-time favorite Castlevania tracks. Honorable mentions, I would say both the Vector Man games and then TMNT, the Hyperstone Heist. That one's a pretty good game. Least favorite, probably the only Genesis game coming to mind that I remember just really not enjoying, and this might be a little bit controversial because I know this series is pretty popular, is the Alex Kidd games. There was one on Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection, and I don't know. I didn't care for it as much as I thought I would.
I think I know what you're talking about. Like, I played one of those games and I got stuck. Like, I didn't know how to progress. I didn't know what was going on, and I'm like, okay, I'm not a fan of this, but you know, to compensate for that, at least they had Gunstar Heroes, and that was pretty fucking good. I loved it. They re-released that on like PS3, and I played the ever-living fuck out of that.
It's also on that game, since it's not, even though what's weird is since it's not directly made by Sega, I think it's on the new collection that's on like Steam and Switch and stuff.
Also, Jojo, your mic has like degraded in quality.
Oh, sorry. Let me fix that. Let me try and fix that.
Okay. But yeah, I it's so many great things about it. It's really hard to talk about like games that were absolutely awful.
Yeah, because to be perfectly honest, it's like, you know, I know that guys like, you know, James Rolfe and his, you know, Angry Video Game Nerd character, you know, cover bad games. You know, I don't typically go out of my way and buy a Genesis game nowadays. You know, like I was saying, you know, we literally quite have, you know, a world of information at our fingertips, you know, and so when I'm out retro shopping and something looks interesting, I'll look up just to see, be like, hey, you know, what's the gameplay like, you know, before I buy it, you know, because I now have that ability. I mean, granted, back in the day when these games came out, it was word of mouth or magazine reviews at best. You know, you didn't have, you know, the internet to look up video game footage and everything like that, you know. So I guess in a way we are kind of blessed, if you will, to have that nowadays. But it's really hard to say, you know, least favorite games, because I don't intentionally go out of my way to play quote unquote bad games on like the NES, Super Nintendo, or anything, you know, retro, if you will.
I agree. Yeah, it's like they exist, but they are such a short minority that I don't even bother.
Is my mic better, by the way? I think I fixed it.
Yes, it is.
Okay, cool.
So we're gonna move on to question number 4. This is interesting. The Genesis had many add-ons that was specific to the console at the time. They tried to compete with their rivals with the creation of the 32X and Sega CD. What went wrong with this approach in your opinion, since these ideas were considered failures? I think what went wrong was the fact that I think even AVGN, a lot of quotes from him, he cited that they had a lot of issues with the power cables, bricks being plugged into the wall, too many extensions that made the 32X and Sega CD problematic. And you don't want that with the console. You want everything to hook up just fine. I do appreciate the games that they had on there that was, you know, really good, or updates like, I think, Eternal Champions, Challenge to the Dark Side, whatever that game is called. I think that's better than the first one. But the problem with the Sega CD was, I think, in the 32X as well, they didn't have enough games that supported buying those projects.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what comes down to it. I know with the Sega CD, early CD-based consoles, you know, before the PlayStation, that technology wasn't necessarily there yet.
Yeah.
And so it was really hard to capitalize on what the Sega CD could have potentially been. Now, granted, there are memorable games on the Sega CD as with the 32X. But the big problem of like cable management, having to specifically, the Model 2 is the most convenient Genesis to be able to hook up these attachments. Like with the Model 1, I think it was something weird, like you have to have metal prongs for the 32X to even plug it in properly to the Model 1, and I don't even think the Model 1 supports the Sega CD. I could be wrong about that. I haven't really looked into that. I do know because my first Genesis that I had was the Model 3, which is the very small, tiny, slimlined version of the Genesis, and that doesn't even support either the Sega CD or the 32X. So it definitely should have been, I think. Again, we keep referencing James Rolfe because he's covered all of this stuff in some shape or form or another. But he brought up that there was actually supposed to be a standalone 32X, and I think Sega probably. Yeah, it did. It got scrapped, unfortunately, but I think they probably would have benefited had they gone that route instead of relying solely on the Genesis to have this hardware be usable. But on the same token, when you look at stuff like modern takes, like you look at something like the Wii U, where their marketing was so poor, people didn't realize it's its own console, not just this tablet that you can sync up to your Wii and everything like that. So I kind of see why Sega went that route, trying to make these add-ons reliant on something that you already own, so you didn't have to go out of your way to buy another separate unit to play these games. But it's just one of those things where it was just early technology. There wasn't a lot of support from developers, and I know with the 32X specifically, it came out in such a weird time frame. It was more or less rushed, so developers didn't really have a lot of time to really understand what made the 32X tick, in a sense to where they could make games that were really stellar and capitalized on everything that the 32X had to offer.
Yeah, I think that I said this earlier, like the problem was they really fucked up with all the management and the cable management, and like really just it was cool that you could play these different types of games on there that had like differing graphics. Some games could take more ROM and shit like that, but the issue there was that it wasn't future proof, and that really kind of shot Sega in the foot, because I'm sure all of that stuff costs like manpower, resources, beta testing, getting that working, and it just turned out to be like a commercial failure because people just weren't into it. They were like, okay, I could get a SNES if I wanted more powerful graphics. So I think it kind of shot them in the foot, but it did produce like some really good games. I think Sonic CD, a lot of people talk about that game. They say it's one of the best Sonic games they played on that platform. So I think it wasn't all for naught, but at the same time they could have done better with how they pushed this out there. I had like a top loader as well for the 32X, and I think you could not play anything that wasn't 32X games. So it was kind of weird. You try to pop in a regular game. Yeah, you try to pop in a regular game, it would not play. You would just get like a white screen. So you had to take the top loader off in order to play it with certain models.
I do know that was, I think there were rumors that was an issue with some units. I have a 32X myself. I've never experienced that issue. I've been able to play my 16-bit Genesis cartridges just fine with it. Maybe I got lucky. I don't know. But yeah, I do know that was an issue, and there was also a rumor about damaging Genesis games, but I don't think that there was any validity to any of those rumors. Like no definitive proof, if anything.
Yeah, holy shit. I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine getting that unlucky. Like, I just basically scraped by, So yeah, it's something that I just wish it was a neat concept for the time, but it's something that I wish they could have improved. Maybe like they could have made another model that did everything. Like you said, supposedly it was canceled, so it never got to see the light of day.
Well, believe it or not, there actually is. It's incredibly rare, so you'll be lucky to find one. There is an all-in-one model. It's like
Really?
the Sega CDX. And I believe it does everything. It plays Sega CD, it plays 32X, and I do believe it plays Genesis games. And I think you can even listen to music on it because it can like act like as a Walkman. But yeah, it's incredibly rare. It's not something that you come across every day. I mean, it took just the luck of the draw for the local shop here to get in a 32X, working 32X. And I still ended up having to buy that connector cable you needed to connect it to the Genesis.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
so it's just like one of those weird things that like kind of like that. There's like what was it, like RCA or JVC or something like that, made like a GameCube that acts as like a Walkman DVD player or something like that. Yeah, some crazy GameCube iteration, and it exists. It's just like one of those weird obscurities that like not a lot of people know about, and they're pricey because of that reason.
Yeah, that sucks. You can't just regularly buy that unless you're like rich or something, because I assume the price is off the charts.
Oh yeah, that was probably the main reason a lot of people like the things failed, because back then when a lot of us were kids, like our parents would maybe just buy us a Sega Genesis because those were cheap and easy to get, whereas the Sega 32X and the Sega CD cost more. And like everyone else said, you gotta have all these cords. Like you gotta have at least 4 outlets open if you wanna have the whole shebang, including your TV. But getting on to what you said about the all-in-one thing, I did see something about what you're talking about, the JVC XI. It was like an all-in-one thing where it was just one system. I think it had a cartridge slot and a disc drive, so it can play both Genesis cartridges and a CD. But I don't know if it was compatible with the 32X or not, because I don't know if it's a different thing. Because I do know about the portable one you're talking about, where you can use it as a Walkman if you want to. This one I'm thinking of is just a straight up hole-in-one console, which was also good too. It's something I wish Sega would have done, but unfortunately, like everyone else said, it's because of all the cords and stuff. It was hard to set up. That, and because this is when FMV games were kind of new.
Oh fuck!
What's up?
The price?
I linked it in the chat.
Hold on, wait. Let me see this price. Let me see this.
So the loose price for it is $315, but the others, it's like almost $1,000.
Jesus Christ!
Oh my god!
Wow, the people, man, that's another thing. Like even getting working Sega CD stuff now is a pain in the ass, because you got to find ones that work, and the ones that work are in such short supply that it's expensive to buy in like third parties and stuff. And like I was saying about, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but back then when we've been quoting a lot of stuff from James Froh, but once again, he is right when people did waited for the new systems like N64 and PlayStation and the Saturn, because who's going to spend money on a system that, I mean, not a system, but an add-on that does not have many games, and that's not going to be worth your time at the time.
This thing looks cool though. I'm gonna timestamp this because I want people to see it, but it looks really fucking cool. It looks like a prototype Saturn, if I'm being honest, because it has like the same make on the top, except it doesn't have it kind of does have the disc popper right there. I like that. It looks pretty cool.
Also, I want to offer a correction. It's the Panasonic Q GameCube. I'm going to link that to you guys as well, so you could. I want to say that wasn't released here in the U.S. I want to say it was either a European or a Japanese only thing.
I bet it kills my wallet.
It's
probably
not
does.
cheap.
Shit.
There are much cheaper options to play GameCube games.
Oh, what is this? Oh, damn.
Ooh, is that a freaking eBay listing? Oh my fucking god. Sweet.
It was never tested. It's brand new. $3,000.
Holy crap, man.
Oh, I
Oh,
would
fuck.
not. I would not take that fucking risk on something that hasn't been tested. Like, no fucking.
I mean, maybe if I won the lottery and I just wanted to see if it worked, okay, but
Oh,
other
for
than
sure.
that,
If I won the lottery and had more money than I knew what to do with, yeah, I'd throw money like fucking at anything. You know those freaking super rare Nintendo games I want? Yeah, here you go. I'll pay $2,000 for a copy of fucking World Championship. Fuck it.
Nice.
Oh, that is too funny, man. But we
Oh,
gotta
keep-
move. We gotta move on to question number 5.
Yeah, please.
Alrighty.
So let's list some positives and negatives about your experience with the Sega CD. My only experience has been through emulator, so I don't have much to say about this one, but I will say I did like how some of the games had, well, they said quote unquote nearly arcade perfect ports for like Final Fight. They had some additional features as well, which I really enjoyed, like time attack and difficulty scaling. I thought that was really cool. But one of the things I didn't like was the FMVs.
Full
Like
motion
they
videos?
were, yeah, the full motion videos. They felt like they were really cheap back then and just zoomed out. I know maybe I'm spoiled by like how modern video works, but back then, for Terminator at least, it really is hard to see what's going on in the background. I think they tried too hard to replicate how the movie was, and it just really didn't sit right with me for some reason.
Oh yeah, the grainy film quality looks almost like a degraded VHS sometimes.
Yeah, it doesn't look good now. I wish it looked like way better than it did, but hey, it's a product of the past, so I will cut it some slack. However, that being said, I think FMVs were done better when they hit like the Sega Saturn.
I'd say my positive, and well, first of all, my favorite positive with the Sega CD, and this is because I'm a little bit of an audiophile. I loved the sound quality of a lot of the games, like take Sonic CD. Like when I first played that game at my friend's house, he had a Sega CD and he had Sonic CD. I thought I'd try it out, and the music just sounded so great. I'm like, wow, I can't believe this. It sounds like I turned on a stereo and the music is playing through it instead of this chiptune stuff that I'm used to. And I'd say my negative with the Sega CD, well, this is because I didn't really get the chance to play it until I had play more of it until I had emulation at my fingertips, I should say, because I was seeing pictures and commercials of all these FNV games. And I kept thinking, keep in mind, I was like 6 or 7 at the time. I'm like, wow, is this what the game actually looks like? I thought these FMVs were like actual gameplay. Like I was controlling the characters in this, like I'd be controlling the characters in the little scenes. I'm like, wow, that blew my mind. But no, it's just cutscenes. Maybe
Yeah.
a little bit of QTE thrown in every now and then.
The marketing really played it up like, oh, you experienced the game so much that you were living it. And it's like, no, that doesn't meet your expectations. I'm sorry.
Pretty much.
So anyone else have any experience with the Sega CD?
For me, I've actually not played any Sega CD games. Like, I think I've played a little bit of Sonic CD, and that's just because of modern conveniences. It's been re-released to death on, Android and Steam and things like that. So it is something I am looking for, though. It's one of the few other consoles in my collection that I'd like to own somewhere down the line. So eventually I will hopefully get around and have a positive, negative opinion on the Sega CD, but for the moment I don't.
Yeah, I only played it through emulation, so I wish I had one in my hands, but I can't really tell someone what are the positives and negatives of the system itself without even trying the system. All I know is the games, and the games, for the most part, were pretty fun.
But I'll tell you this, Ren.
What?
I'll tell you this: the obvious Sega CD has the best port of Final Fight.
They
hands
do.
down.
They do. I don't know what Nintendo was thinking, taking out the 2 players, but and also taking out Guy and making a version that has Guy but not Cody. That was so fucking strange. Like I even called that out when I was doing like my Final Fight retro weekend. I said that's so fucking strange. They made a version just for Guy, and they must have sold like the game for the same price, which is highway robbery.
I actually can comment. Oh wait, I was gonna say I can comment on that, but that's for a Super Nintendo game, so I'll just hold off on that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they lock out content, for no reason.
The Sega CD had a better port of Mortal Kombat 1 than the Sega Genesis, simply because the sound quality was better, and you didn't have to put in the blood code to get the blood. It was just there.
Oh yeah, that's cool. I gotta check that out after podcast. So let's see here. We're on number 6, which is pretty easy. Considering that Sonic was a big flagship title for Sega, do you believe that their mascot lived up to all the expectations of quality? I would say yes if we're talking about like Sonic 1 through Sonic and Knuckles and Sonic CD. They were pretty solid games. I had like no issue with them of the sort.
Oh yeah, if you would have asked me this question back when like the Genesis was still around and the newer Sonic games were not even a thing, I would say hell yeah.
Yeah.
But now. No.
Yeah, now it's like no, because Sonic games are no.
Sonic Forces, anyone?
No.
Sonic Boom.
Yeah, but back then Sonic used to be a system seller. There is no contest. Like my parents really fucking love Sonic so much that they got me a Genesis just because of that. Hey, your kid might like this, so you might pick this up for them. But that being said, I think the quality of the game was really good as well. Like, I admit Sonic 1 is aged compared to the later sequels. Let's be honest, there's some stuff that the first game could have used to be better, but there's a question later that they did that was really innovative, and I don't think that many games back then did that feature that was on question number 9. But it was pretty cool for the time. Like, just the stages, the levels, the fact that it was fast, and I remember people saying, oh, Sonic and Mario, they have some sort of rivalry going on, and I do appreciate that. Like, Sonic was super fast and Mario was like kind of a little bit more slower, methodical even, because you got to go up and down to find shit. But I like both franchises for what they were.
Yeah, I think I can agree that for the time when the Genesis was a big deal, and Sega was still a viable competitor in the console market, I would say that Sonic was definitely living up to most of the expectations. But as time told, eventually went on, Sonic didn't. It's very much that Sonic did not age like Mario did, where most of the Mario games, yeah, you could say, newer Mario games are repetitive and everything like that. They stick to that, format of how they play, but it's worked is the thing. Like, Mario has stuck with like this specific kind of format of how each game plays, and then there's there's a couple of like the off ones like Super Mario 64 and then Sunshine and now Odyssey, where it goes into the whole 3D world environment and everything like that. But when you look at like the linear side-scrolling Marios, they've stuck with that format and it's worked. Where Sonic, kind of tried to make that leap to 3D with like Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2. And while those games I think are definitely better than some of the later games that we got, it's just like they tried so many different things with Sonic and they just didn't stick with what made Sonic good to begin with. And it wasn't until many years later when Sonic Generations came out that was like a step forward, and then whatever game after that, I forget what was released, but like it was like a step backward again, and Sonic has just kind of been in this state where it's back and forth. Oh, one game like in a 5-year time span comes out that's really good, but every other game in between that is just awful or is mediocre at best. And now we have the lovely live action movie to look at. So,
oh God, I'm getting cancer hearing about
You
it.
know,
Yeah, Sonic is up and down.
hold
Like,
on.
go ahead.
You mean the live action movie that's so bad even the creator despises it?
Yeah, he said, "What is this? Like, this is not Sonic. What are you guys doing?"
Right.
So I think that Sonic has had its fair share of problems. Let's be honest, because it's not perfect. It's one of the franchises, like Daybreaker said, where it has like ups and downs. Obviously, the downs are a lot more obvious. I do think though that it did have potential back then. It really shined back then, but since it didn't stick to the formula and they tried so many new things, it really didn't work for that franchise. I see now, like Sonic Mania, that game is great, but it sticks to like 2D Sonic. It's like the Sonic that you always knew. So the
Sonic
reason
that always should have been. Sorry.
Yeah.
Joe.
It should have been like just that and nothing really outlandish, like it's some shit that didn't work in Adventure, like Big the Cat, and it's fucking. They should have changed it to be so different, but lose the core of what Sonic was.
Froggy?
Oh my god.
Froggy.
I just wish that, you know, they kept that same core quality, because it's like you said, Mario, it hasn't changed much, but what they have is still pretty good.
Oh yeah.
All right, so I guess we can move on to question number 7. One of the slogans for many consoles during that time was bringing the arcade to your home. What do you think about this statement for the Genesis? Did they succeed at this premise, especially regarding fighting games? It's a little bit mixed in my opinion, because you're gonna. I think they lost something for the migration of arcade ports. Like maybe the game doesn't look that good, or maybe the music has been changed.
Missing content.
Yeah, maybe there's content missing. I think Mortal Kombat, like, the problems with that was that it didn't look as good on the Genesis, and it also sounded different. It didn't sound like the arcade music. But Arcade Collection, the music sounds just like the arcade ports. So it always felt like something was lost in translation for those games. I do think that they did accomplish bringing the gameplay, the core experience, ripping someone's head off, holding up his spine, all that shit. They did bring that to the homes, and you didn't have to pay like about thousands of quarters because the game cheated. You could play the game at home and just enjoy yourself from there. So it made it an entirely different experience that really held up in the long run.
So sorry about that. Pretty much the same answer as yours, except what I do like when it comes to that, when Genesis does usually for their fighting games, is like the input delay. I think whenever I play a port of a fighting game to Sega Genesis, I feel like when I played on the Genesis version, I can at least give them credit where it doesn't feel delay whenever I do like a move, say a Hadouken or a Shoryuken, for example. I don't feel limited when you do those moves, as opposed to, you know, the competition Super Nintendo, where it feels a bit lag when you do simple moves. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's why I'll give Genesis credit for that.
Before I answer this, I gotta ask, the game Eternal Champions, did that game have an arcade version? I'm just curious.
I don't think it did.
Let me check.
All right,
Eternal
while you're-
Champions?
Yeah, Eternal Champions. Well, while you're doing that, I would say that they're like some of the earlier arcade ports, like Strider, for example. Everyone knows how good Strider on the Genesis was and how good it was, like how much they said it matched the arcade version pretty well. Obviously, you're not putting in a bunch of quarters. I did think that, obviously, because when the Genesis came around, when the Genesis was coming into the early mid 90s, like when Mortal Kombat was coming around, obviously they had to cut some corners to make, like you said in Mortal Kombat 1, Ren, how the sound and the graphics weren't nearly as good as even the arcade version or even the Super Nintendo version.
Just a correction, I do think that the sound, even in the Genesis game, I do think that the music is still good, but it's just not the arcade version. It's like definitely reorchestrated, so to speak.
Yeah, that was one of the Genesis's strong points. Ironically, was the sound was the sound quality wasn't as good as arcade or Super Nintendo. So people were porting games over. They kind of like changed up stuff in it to make it so where yeah, it still sounds like the Genesis music, but it still sounds really really awesome. Like a lot of the tunes sound like guitars and stuff.
Mm.
And I think it was okay for games like Street Fighter 2 and Super Street Fighter 2. I'm just gonna say this: if anyone out there is planning to listening to this and they're planning to play those on an actual Genesis, get a 6-button controller or an arcade stick, because the 3-button controller, it just does not work really well with that, because you have to hit start to switch between punches and kicks, and meaning you lose the ability to pause.
Yeah, that really blows.
For me, I would say I think with the arcade ports that came out on Sega's later consoles, such as the Sega Saturn, for example, Night Warriors: The Darkstalker's Revenge is fucking phenomenal on Sega Saturn. Like, I absolutely love it. So I will say that I think when they started moving to the CD based consoles, I at least in my opinion, the arcade at home premise kind of came about a lot better and translated better, because graphics were getting better, sound quality was getting better, so they could have that technical arcade experience in the home. uh, for me, it was always like, when it came to fighting games, I grew up with the Super Nintendo. Like, the neighbors across the street had a Super Nintendo. That's where I remember watching them play Mortal Kombat 3 and Mortal Kombat 2. Used to watch my brother and this neighbor freaking play for hours before we would go to school and things like that. So especially, at least when it comes to like sound and overall presentation, like having both versions of Super Street Fighter 2, not only for the Genesis but for the Super Nintendo, it's kind of like a night and day difference. The Super Nintendo version of Super Street Fighter 2 being one of my earliest memories of a video game, just that title screen with Ryu and everything, that was like one of the big things that always stuck out to me. So I would say that, for convenience sake, though, I mean, yeah, like, no one can deny, and I think even some people will argue, even if the games are not as accurate as the arcade versions, because let's be real, I mean, it took a long time for a game like Turtles in Time to come out and sort of have that same Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade feel. So it took a really long time for something like that, but I don't think anybody really could say that they were wanting the exact carbon copy of the arcade experience. I mean, it's a lot better than some of like the quote unquote arcade ports on like the NES, for example, because the arcade game for TMNT got ported to the NES of all freaking systems instead of the Genesis or the Super Nintendo. But for convenience sake, you're not having to spend hundreds and hundreds of quarters into a machine to get credits. You can climb the Mortal Kombat towers and continue as often as you want, or however much the game allows and things like that. But you're not wasting money. It's like you buy the game and it's there, it's ready to go. If you've got like what Jojo was saying, have your 2-button, your 2 6-button controllers ready for multiplayer for the Genesis, it's all good to go. So it's like, it's definitely a satisfying feeling being able to just like pop in a game like Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 and just booting it up and jumping right into the action.
That and the 6-button controllers, in my humble opinion, are some of the most comfortable controllers I've ever used.
I've actually, to just comment on that, I've never had an issue with the Sega controller, aside a little bit from the Dreamcast controller, because a lot of games, especially when it comes to fighting games, are either stuck on the joystick or the D-pad just doesn't feel as good. But like Saturn's controllers, love the Saturn controller. Genesis controller, never had an issue with the Genesis controller. So yeah, it's just a really comfortable controller. They did a really good job with that, unlike Nintendo and their awkward 3-handled 64 controller. discussion for another day.
Oh boy.
But since we were talking about Eternal Champions, I just want to bring this up. There was a Tiger Electronics version of Eternal Champions, and somehow you can play all 9 characters.
What?
What?
Yeah, I saw that one was made. I never got a chance to play it because it's a damn Tiger game. Nobody likes those anymore.
Just looking at this freaking thing, it's freaking crazy. Pocket Arcade, that's what it's called. Oh yeah, because a Tiger Electronics game is definitely the freaking arcade experience.
Oh, definitely not.
Can we talk about that another time?
Yeah, we can talk about shitty handhelds probably in the future, because I do remember playing one of those. I think there was they had wrestling versions as well.
They had they had the Sonic games too.
Yeah, and the wrestling versions had different characters with different Tiger Electronic handhelds. So maybe you get to play with Hulk Hogan or Bret Hart or Undertaker with certain handhelds, and I thought it was so fucking dumb. Because it's okay, in order to get this character, I need the exact electronic for it. So why would you do this to me?
Yeah, just off the top of my head, thinking about it, because I actually had a Dragon Ball Z. I don't know if it was a Tiger thing. I know it was a little LCD game that was Dragon Ball Z. So those things still existed when Dragon Ball Z became a huge old fucking thing here in the US. So it's just, oh man, yeah, that'd be a fun discussion.
Oh, Tiger Electronics, man, that's gonna bring up some memories, but we gotta move on to question number 8 and then number 9 to wrap things up. So what did you think of the lock-on feature for Sonic and Knuckles, where you could play with other characters in previous entries?
Well, I liked it because it actually was the first time I ever got introduced to Knuckles, and through that he's become my favorite Sonic character. It was because of that, I was able to play Sonic 2 and 3 as Knuckles, and because he has the ability to climb up on walls and kind of glide, kind of like a flying squirrel, you could find hidden areas in the stage you normally can't get to, and I thought it was kind of fascinating to see that back in the day. It's a shame that it only legitly worked with 2 games, though.
Yeah, I thought it was so fucking cool, but the problem was they only did it for that game because I believe Sonic 3 got cut in half, so that was the end result, that lock-on feature, and it was awesome. It was super cool, but they only did it just for that game.
Wasn't that an add-on? And then later they made it as a separate game?
In later collections, I believe they just bundle it and call it Sonic 3 and Knuckles, right?
Yeah. Which makes sense.
You can actually put the Sonic and Knuckles cartridge into your Genesis without having a game on top of it, and you could play the other half of Sonic 3 that was cut out because due to memory limitations on the cartridge. You can play those other half of the game as Sonic or Knuckles. But if you put on the Sega, the Sonic 3 cartridge, you could play them all together, and I thought that was kind of cool. You could play it separately if you wanted to. If you didn't have the other games, you could still play it.
I think modders, too, they went out of their way to make complete versions of Sonic 3 as well, so it's called, Sonic 3 Complete if you download those versions.
Right, and you can also do that with the PC version, which I actually believe it or not have a hard copy of.
It's just a damn shame they did not do it for other titles. It's really cool to go back and say, hey, I can use this character, I can play with this character previously, and I could not do it in other stages. I thought it was awesome.
Oh, shout outs to the modders who makes, characters like Knuckles be playable in the older Sonic titles like Sonic 1 and 2.
Oh yeah, that's cool. That's fucking cool, man.
One of the reasons why I like emulation.
Even though Knuckles is borked because he can't jump that high. So I kind of think that run on Sonic 2 would be super hard, especially against the Egg Robo at the end, where you have to jump into his stomach and your jumping ability is borked.
Yeah.
Right? You can't jump as high or run as fast, but you can still climb up. You can climb up walls and glide, so it's kind of a trade-off.
Yeah. All right. Are we ready to answer the final question?
Can I read the question?
Sure, you can.
All right. The final question is: what is the best and worst Genesis collection you have played so far, and which collection would you recommend it for people who are getting into the Genesis for the first time? Well, Ren, I know it's going to be the obvious answer, but the best Genesis collection I have played so far, and the collection I would recommend people, is the Genesis collection that was released for the 360 and PS3, because I believe, in comparison to, I think, the current Genesis collection
that's on Steam.
Yeah, that's on Steam and current consoles, that has more games than the current Genesis collection, and more Genesis games they could have added into the new one that you could play and really enjoy.
Yeah, I think it's cool with the Steam versions that you can play like online and shit.
And the mods.
And the mods, but I do believe you can do 2-player on the Xbox 360 and PS3 versions. And there's just more games. I believe it's called Sonic Mega Collection.
And
Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection, yep.
Yeah. That one.
And just the one on Steam, like I said, I think it's cool, but there is a lot more games that are missing. I said it in chat. I don't think currently there's a super comprehensive collection because copyright, all that bullshit. So unfortunately, if you want to play many Genesis games that you didn't have the opportunity to play, you would have to either buy them or emulate. But the most comprehensive one I play is definitely that PS3 version, because it just has a lot. It has a lot of mini games as well I never seen before, like the I think there's like a Robotnik mini game that you can play, and I've never seen that before in any collection. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Nikki, goddamn. I pretty much would agree. I think that sentiment. Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection is a really good, stellar collection of great Genesis games. Has a handful. I mean, I think it's got the 4 Phantasy Star games. So I mean, there's JRPGs in there, great, side scroller beat 'em ups, action adventure games. You've got a great selection in there. Some great puzzle games as well. So I would definitely recommend that, because that version is actually it's been re-released as like a greatest hits and platinum hits, depending on the platform that you choose. So it's a lot easier to get a hold of. It's super inexpensive. I think I ended up buying a 360 copy for like $10 from a used secondhand store. So it's not something super expensive. The Switch collection that came out not too long ago does have some games that are not present on the Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection, but it's still kind of up there in price. I think it's like a used copy at GameStop is still like running like $37.99. So that's a little bit expensive, especially considering a lot of these games, they've been re-released to death. If you're looking for specific games, the Steam option is a way to go, because you can just pick and choose games instead of buying the whole collection outright if you wanted to. But I see those games go on sale a hell of a bunch, so it's like you could probably get the whole collection that Steam even offers for a fairly decent price. Android, for those who use Android phones, they actually have a Sega. It's called Sega Forever collection, and it's basically they're like re-releasing a bunch of their old Genesis games for free. The only downside there is, you have to deal with ads. I think there's like a paid version or something you can buy where it's like, oh, it's ad free. But if you want it on the go or, whatever, that's an option. So there's just a plethora of collections out there. I mean, even the PS2 collections are pretty decent for what they are. I know like the Sonic's Mega Mix has a couple of like the weird off the wall Sonic games like Sonic the Fighters and like Sonic R for Saturn, which are ridiculous to try to get emulated or to try to freaking buy physical copies of. So if you're interested in like games like that, that's an option you can check out. I think there was even a Sega Genesis collection on PSP. So yeah, it's a plethora of collections to choose from. But yeah, if I was to go with any one specific just for convenience and its price, Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection, super easy to get a hold of, $20 brand new. You could probably get it even cheaper than that if you wanted a used version.
Can you feel the sunshine?
No, you stole my joke. No.
Wait, what?
Can you feel the sunshine?
Oh.
Sonic R, and yeah, someone once told me that you can actually get fucking lead and enjoy Sonic's tracks on Sonic R with Can You Feel the Sunshine and something else. I forget the other one.
That's probably the only memorial about that game is the soundtrack.
Oh yeah, he said, you know what, you can make love to Supersonic Racing, and I'm like, what kind of logic is that for like just games in general? Like who the fuck would do this? I just thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, I have to agree with all you guys about the Sonic's Genesis collection on PS3 and 360, because not only does it have a very robust collection of Genesis games, it also has Sonic 3 and I think Sonic and Knuckles separate, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they keep taking Sonic 3 out because of music licensing issues, because Michael Jackson made the soundtrack apparently.
Yeah, he worked on him, and he died years ago, so that's unfortunate. And the Genesis collection on the PS3 and 360 also had unlockable Master System and arcade Sega games. Like you can, like if you play Sonic 2 and beat the first boss with a second controller plugged in controlling Tails, you could unlock the first Phantasy Star, which was a Master System game, and I thought that was kind of cool. And you can
I didn't know that.
Yeah, just have a second controller plugged in, and you don't even have to control Tails. Just have them standing there, and when you beat them on the 360 and PS3 collection, you unlock that one game, and it's awesome. And there's some arcade games on there too. Like I think you could play. I think you could play the arcade version of Altered Beast on there, I think.
Yeah, so I believe so, yes.
I'd say that's the most robust package. And of course, there are the free Genesis games you can get. You also get Crazy Taxi on there too. That one's free, but you can get all the free Genesis collections on your mobile phone, even though I don't really like doing that because controlling those on a cell phone kind of hurts my hands a little bit. I'd rather use a controller, but that's besides the point. The worst collection, I think I mentioned this in the chat earlier, was I don't know if you guys remember the Sega Smash Pack on the Dreamcast. I don't know if you guys
were talking about that briefly.
Yeah, like I don't know what has worse Genesis ports, that or the @Games thing, because on the Genesis, on the Sega Genesis collection on the Dreamcast, I mean, the gameplay is fine on the games that they included. It's just they only had 10 games on there, and the sound effects are so weird and glitchy. Like Phantasy Star 2, if you play that on a normal Genesis or an arcade, like when you attack, you hear like a like you're swinging a sword. But in the Dreamcast port, it's like beeping sounds, and the Sega Sonic 1 port on that. All the sound effects are wrong. Like the sound effects of you grabbing rings sounds like you're grabbing coins in Mario, and when you jump on a spring, you don't get that satisfied, boing sound. It sounds more like you're hitting a plate of spaghetti with a banjo or something.
Actually, I got a question for you. Do you ever watch or play the Dreamcast port of Streets of Rage 2?
Dreamcast? I didn't even know there was. Are you talking about the Beats of Rage remake or
no?
Legit port?
There was a legit port of Streets of Rage 2 on the Dreamcast.
I played the one that was on the Sega Smash Pack on the Dreamcast. It played okay. It's just the sound quality was kind of weird. Like whenever you kill a bad guy in the game, they can make a sound.
Yeah.
When you defeat the female characters, it sounds like a car squealing.
I think that was what I was talking about.
Yeah, it's like it sounds like a car just skidding out of Dodge or whatever.
Oh man, I'm not even gonna get into the whole fucking Virtua Fighter was on like Genesis, and it's 2D. No. It's 2D treesh.
Let's not talk about that.
I just gotta ask, Sega, if you're listening, why do you insist on putting that game on there. Nobody likes that specific port of Virtua Fighter 2.
Thank you, Sony, for releasing the arcade version on PS3, PSN.
Oh yeah, that was amazing. I love that one. I mean, I understand because that's originally an arcade and Saturn game, but you could have put a different game on there. Like, I don't know.
They could have.
Yeah. I'm amazed it's not a Virtua Fighter collection on Steam. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Or like on like at least PS4 or something. I would buy it.
Wait a minute. You just remind me. Why is none of the Virtua Fighter game is on Steam in general? Like, not even 2.
Yeah, that's weird.
Not even 5. Like, what the fuck? Well, Sega, what are you doing on that one?
Sega, get your heads out of your asses for a few minutes, man.
I will give Sega this. They have like done some pretty good ports recently.
Oh yeah.
I remembered. I was thinking. I was like in my head. I was like, wasn't Virtua Fighter 1 included on something? Yeah, it's Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution on PlayStation 2 has Virtua Fighter 1 on it, but the original, not Virtua Fighter Remix, the Saturn version, which is the version I grew up with, and that version's fucking stellar. But yeah, speaking of Sega, Microsoft, if either of you two are listening, because I don't know who's responsible for this, why is Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection not backwards compatible on Xbox One? Why is like every fucking Sonic game on the planet and Sonic the Fighters on that list, but Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection isn't? Step it up, Microsoft, Sega, get on that shit.
Oh yes, definitely. Really, they need to do that. That needs to be like the next Xbox One backwards compatible announcement.
They're busy with Yakuza, which I don't mind because that series so far, man, it's really good. But Sega, enough. Come on, man. Oh, and Jet Set Radio Future. Sega.
Oh fuck, yeah.
Yeah, where is that game?
Where's that backwards compatibility? I'll buy. I could have sworn when I went to GameStop, that game was like sold for like $3 to $5, even with the I forgot.
The Sega GT. Yeah, it's like Sega GT, like 2002 or something like that.
Yeah, like if they get announced for backwards compatibility, I'll be ready to buy them cheap.
Yep. All right, people. So I think that is enough for this podcast. We're gonna call it. Had a lot of fun. Put in a lot of great memories with the Sega Genesis, and obviously, maybe there's some Nintendo stuff coming down the line because we've talked about them a lot too. But we're gonna get to outros here. So,
one more thing. Can we dedicate like an entire fucking podcast to just shitting on games? Because I have experience with that shit, and I gotta tell you about that fucking thing. It was the
Isn't that the reason why they're actually making their own Sega Genesis Classic?
Yes.
Holy shit!
Those fucking things are so shit.
Wait, what happened? At Games?
Yeah, they made like a Genesis classic retro console, and it's shit. It's flimsy crap. Like,
oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so Sega is pretty much like, okay, at Games, you've had your fun. We're fucking taking back this shit, and we're doing it ourselves.
Yes.
I mean, the only cool thing it had about it was it had a cartridge slot where you could put your own cartridges. It just played them all horribly. The controllers didn't work because they used infrared, and infrared's like for TV controllers, and it only had a composite mono audio video, no HD.
You know, speaking of like the Sega Genesis Classic, I'm surprised they're managing to one-up Nintendo when it comes to that. I heard they're supporting. I'm hearing they're adding more things to the Classic than what Nintendo did with their classics. I think they added like. No, sorry to interrupt, but I think they're adding. I think more games into the Classic into what Super Nintendo does. I could be wrong. I do know they're adding native support for like if you have the 6 button controllers for Sega Genesis, that it will also be supported for the Classic.
Oh my god, fucking thank you.
Oh, no more like 3-button fighting games. That's really good.
Yeah.
That was the fucky thing I heard about that new Classic console though. Something weird where like the US version is coming with 3-button controllers, but the EU and the Japanese versions are coming with the 6-button controllers. What the fuck, Sega? Why not just make that the fucking standard across the board?
Yeah, really.
And like I said, we US people get screwed. Japan gets the good shit, and Europe.
I'll be satisfied as long as it has at least Phantasy Star 2, 3, and 4, and both Shining Force games. I'll be happy with that.
You'll be more happy once it gets modded because with every classic, even the shitty one, Sony, that it gets modded.
Yeah, they modded to make it better.
Yep, it's a shame no one can do that with the games one, but what can you do?
Oh, I know.
Why would you?
I think the thing is that there's so many avenues that hackers and modders can, look at to play all these older games. They probably take one look at the game shit and be like, oh, fuck that.
I'm not wasting my time on this shit.
Not wasting my time on that shit.
I think they must have bailed it because they know how bad it was. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
I don't blame them. But we gotta get to these outros, so Daybreaker, you go first.
You can find me at Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and I think that's pretty much it on at Daybreaker. Trying to get back into streaming regularly. Not working out too well, but one of these days I'll hopefully be more consistently.
Also, you cut out, what was your information again?
Oh, I did? Oh, I'm so sorry. You can find me at Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube at Daybreaker Rain. And I am trying to get back into streaming more consistently on my Twitch. Not working out too well, but I hope to fix that and remedy that here in the near future.
Mr. Kaneki?
You can find me on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube at the same name, Google War Order. And please, Sega, please, Jet Set Radio Future backwards compatibility, please, or Microsoft. I already have the game on the first game on PS3 and PC, but this would be great if it was backwards compatibility for Jet Set Radio Future. I'll be happy.
Was that game on the OG Xbox or no?
Yeah, it was.
Future, yeah.
Oh, I have that. Then I could pick that up. See what that game's all about. But
It's basically, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's basically improved a lot. Like it's a good sequel to the first game.
But Jojo, you are next.
All right, you can find me on YouTube at Mr. Bastard Gamer. I'm gonna be
What?
streaming. Yeah, Mr. Bastard Gamer. It's a long story. I'm gonna be. I stream occasionally. I don't really have a schedule. I just stream crap whenever it comes to my mind. I'm streaming Dragon Quest games right now, and I'm also on Twitter at The Lost Jojo, all one word.
All right, so you can find me at
Pornhub.
Yeah, at Pornhub. You can find me on Twitter at RenOperative _. My PSN is now RenOperative _. Thank fucking God, Sony. You can find me on YouTube at Renegade Operative and on Twitch at Renegade _ Shut up. At Renegade _operative on Twitch. I don't have much going on right now. There is videos that is unlisted that I have to upload, as well as this podcast, so I will be working on that as soon as I can. I'm trying to think of the next discussion for us to do, but when I get around to that, it's going to be fun as usual. Remember, come on by, hit me up, give me your girlfriend's news, and I'll be completely fine with that. I'm trying to advertise myself here.
Yeah, you better beat Ren and MK11 next week, fam.
No, I will be practicing at that game, so I think we're gonna just be playing that, having a lot of fun with it and seeing how it is.
Oh, it's on. I've already got mine pre-ordered. I'm gonna be trying to kick all your asses in it.
I got the deluxe edition pre-ordered.
Yeah, I started with Mortal Kombat, and now we're going right back to Mortal Kombat. So that's
right.
I'm waiting for Sam's show, so that's where you'll find me when that game comes out.
Oh, don't worry, I got you, fam. Day one, PS4.
Yep. So we're gonna sign out really quickly. See you guys later. This is the IAS signing out, and take care.
Later, everybody.
Sega.
Sega.
Sega.